What's up everybody, welcome back to another ProGuides video. My name is Nathaning and I'm here with the 12.6 mid-patch update. We'll provide updated tier lists for all 5 roles and follow up on balance changes from the patch. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future content like this, and let's get started. First, we'll start off with our top laners. We'll start things out by looking at Poppy, who moves up to the OP tier this patch. She just hard rolls just about every single meta champion in the role. She's one of the only picks that I can say consistently dumpsters Riven, with the tools to beat her up in 1v1s and completely shut her down in teamfights. Plenty of tanks can be good enough to be considered in the S tier due to the consistent results that they get. So what sets apart the ones that are strong enough to make it to the OP tier? Like Shen and Tahm Kench, who were already there, Poppy is a strong duelist who can duke it out and easily bring down targets when ahead. The key is not having her usefulness being bound to an ultimate cooldown like you see with Malphite. Or like you see with Ornn, who is being promoted to the S tier with this update. He's really been on a tear lately, with his win rate being above 53% at the moment. A champion that's doing that well has no business being in the B tier. While he isn't quite the bully like Poppy is, he still has a very strong lane phase, mostly due to his ability to constantly buy items without having to go back to base. This lets you power creep your opponent out of lane within minutes. The other obvious selling point for Ornn is the ability to upgrade allies' items, so if the game drags out, you give your carries the extra power to win fights. Camille dropped a bit in performance this patch, so she moved right back down to the S tier. She's still a really solid scaling carry, but not quite consistent enough to make the bar for the OP tier. Akshan, on the other hand, has been doing better and gets bumped up to the S tier. Remember that Kraken is a mythic that you want to go for if you're going to try to carry games, especially after Shield Bow's nerf this patch. Now that we separated our tier list between higher elo and lower levels of play, Camille gets a demotion to the A tier here. She's definitely a 1v9 carry when played perfectly, but you really need good mechanics to pull that off, and that's just not something that you're really going to see often in plat and under games, though people nowadays have really crazy mechanics. Nasus has dropped off a bit in performance, so he's dropping down to the A tier. He's definitely better off against melee heavy teams, or those that don't have super strong tank killers. Despite his reputation as a low elo pub stomper type of champion, Shinimir actually does a lot better at higher levels of play, so he gets dropped down to the B tier here for now. Now for the jungle, here's our list. Now that people are building lethality on Talon jungle instead of playing him like a bruiser, he's doing way better, so we're bumping him up all the way up to the S tier. He's able to use those early leads to snowball super hard and absolutely roll games. He's even bordering on being bumped up into the OP tier. Nunu is still a pretty solid pick, but he's just not quite as reliable of a pick as the other champions in the S tier, so rather than keeping him as the weakest champion in the S tier, we'll say that he's just on the higher end of the A tier champions. For the same reason as Nunu, Sejuani also gets moved down to the A tier. She's a great champ for engaging fights, but she falls short in dueling power and is much weaker when her ultimate is down. Her shortcomings weigh her down just a bit too much to stay in the S tier. Wukong gets bumped up from the B tier to the A tier. He's too good of an all-around pick to stay down there. He has good dueling, good skirmishing, and good team fighting. If it wasn't for his slow clear speed, keeping his tempo pretty low, he could even move up to the S tier. Mordekaiser fell off pretty hard in performance. He's still a good counter pick, specifically against melee heavy teams, especially those with tankier, lower threat champions. But it feels absolutely miserable to play him against teams that have a tank killer and a lot of kiting ability. Kayn also falls off pretty hard, which is kind of surprising. I figured the new Treasure Hunter rune would at least make Blue Kayn a lot more snowbally, but he's actually doing worse now than he has before in the past few months. With a barely positive win rate, you could almost make an argument for him to stay in the A tier, but I think he's just too situational of a pick, so he belongs in the B tier. Another champion being affected by our high elo versus standard tier list is Viego. He no longer belongs anywhere near the top of the tier list at this level. He's just way too hard for people in the plat and under skill bracket to pull off consistently. His kit used to be so overpowered that you could sort of just glaze over being bad at the champions that you picked up, but now you really have to understand how those champions work. Aside from the players in this elo lacking that level of skill, or I guess experience, he also is generally hard to slot into any team comp. He doesn't provide much other than his damage, so if you don't get an early lead with him, he's pretty much useless. But he's a really low tempo champion early on, so getting that necessary lead isn't usually that easy to do. Now, here's our mid lane tier list. Usually we only address the champions that are moving spots on the tier list, but I have to say something about Pike. While Pike's win rate has dropped a little bit this patch, I think that we can chalk that up partially to a lot of new people playing him because of his new Ashen Knight skin. So with that in mind, he keeps a spot in the OP tier. Talon gets promoted up to the OP tier. He's just all around way too good of a pick right now. He's a bully in most matchups with insane kill threat as early as level 2. The people that try to respect this kill threat just concede the lane entirely, which opens you up to roaming and ganking the rest of the map. Plenty of champions excel at roaming, but no one does it like Talon. Being able to parkour over walls means they can go around wards and even come from unexpected angles. This gives them a much higher success rate than other champions when it comes to ganking. Or you can just flip into the enemy jungle and nuke their jungler while he's clearing camps to completely tilt him off the rift. I think Zilean is basically always a good pick regardless of the meta. He's just such a consistently strong scaling champion with the ability to neutralize most lanes, so he's a low risk high reward pick. And he's doing so well lately that he gets bumped up into the S tier. Sylas gets dropped all the way down to the B tier. Another adjustment due to us distinguishing high elo from this list. The thing is, Sylas is a pretty darn hard champion to play well, and even when he is played super well, he's barely even going to make the cut for the A tier in high elo. For him to be a good pick, the enemy team comp needs to have some good ultimates for you to steal. And no, Malphite top alone isn't enough to make him a good pick. You also need to be in one of the few good lane matchups in the mid lane. Even if the enemy team does have 3+ ults for you to steal, what does it matter if you're super behind? You'd always be better off playing a champion that could be useful on their own rather than getting baited into picking him. Set gets dropped down to the C tier, which basically means that even in his very best matchups, there's almost always way better counter picks available. In lane, he still hard counters melee assassins pretty hard, as he mitigated a lot of their bursts and come out on top of trades, but that's the end of the things that he's good at. You don't have the wave clear or the ability to force fights on them, so most assassins can just at least survive the laning phase against you. Then Set falls off hard outside of the laning phase, and your opponent is still able to perform decently in fights since they can just zip past you to your backline. Compare this to another counter pick to assassins like Garen. Garen can completely stomp assassins at all stages of the game. In teamfights, you can just right-click them, using his silence and huge damage to completely prevent them from participating in the fray. Aside from how hard he shuts down assassins, Garen is just also a very useful carry on his own, while Set is kind of just a flop. Now let's move things down to the bot lane. We sometimes refer to a certain champion as deserving a tier even above the OP tier. Well, if anyone has ever deserved a god tier all to themselves, believe it or not, it's Heimerdinger. With lifesteal being lowered and ADCs as a whole just being weaker, he's an absolutely disgustingly strong pick right now. He wins all lanes, scales super hard, and can itemize for better damage against both squishy and tankier opponents. Plus, he's super self-sufficient in fights. While most bot lane carries need a lot of peel to get out damage in fights, between building Zhonya's, fighting on his turrets, and having his grenade to stun divers, you'll usually nuke your attackers before they can kill you. To back up what I'm saying, we have some 12.6 stats for Heimerdinger. The sample size isn't that big, but it's hard to downplay a whole 58% win rate. So until further notice, he's definitely the absolute best pick in the game for bot lane carry. As usual, when ADCs as a whole gets nerfed, Lucian rises up to the top. So with all the lifesteal items and runes taking hits, he's jumped up quite a bit, being our only marksman that makes our OP tier cut. Honestly, I thought of all the carries, Jinx would be the least affected by the lifesteal nerfs, but she actually took a surprisingly hard hit and has fallen to the point that she could almost be put in the A tier. But she's still one of the best carries in late game, so if you're a good laner and you're able to survive the early game and reach 3 items, she's plenty viable for you. Seraphine as a bot lane carry is definitely the best and arguably only real viable way to play her, but she just doesn't compare to our other OP picks in this tier, so she's being dropped down to the S tier for now. She's a great pick for having a huge impact on 5v5s, and is probably the best pick if you want to contribute as much as possible for the least amount of effort. Miss Fortune drops down to the B tier. She's just pretty mediocre at the moment. She's still a pretty decent lane bully, but she can't leverage that lead as hard as before. Other lane bullies like Heimer and Lucian bully harder and scale better. All in all, you can pick her in certain situations, but there are usually better options. Draven also gets bumped down to the B tier. Draven heavily leans on lifesteal. His entire identity is basically pumping out huge amounts of damage while face tanking enemies, and using his high damage lifesteal through the threat rather than outplaying it. With lifesteal's blanket nerf on this patch, he's taking quite a heavy hit and drops down to the B tier. If you get super fed, you can take over the game, but that means he's pretty feast or famine. Tilia gets added to the B tier as a new addition to this list. Unlike our previous entries that landed in the B tier because of how mediocre they were, she's here because she's super situational. She needs a good kill lane partner to make her good, so to get consistent results, it's definitely best to play her with a reliable duo. When you do meet those conditions, she's an insanely strong cheese pick in the bot lane with the ability to 100-0 opponents when you combo with your support. Ezreal gets dropped down to the C tier. While Ez is a pretty safe pick due to his high range of mobility, he's also a pretty useless one. You won't die, but you also won't be killing anybody. Zeri is still a pretty good pick at the top of the ladder, but here in our Platinum Under tier list, she's being dropped all the way down to the C tier. You just need way better mechanics than players at this level are gonna have, especially when all of your power is tied to your ultimate. To finish things off, we have our supports. Morgana drops down to the B tier. She's just way too situational of a pick. Other supports offer a lot more utility, so if you aren't using her hard to shut down telegraphed engages or hooks, she's just gonna be outclassed. Seraphine is by far the worst of all enchanters, so she gets dropped down all the way to the C tier. She just has way too little presence in the game and doesn't really scale hard enough on a support income to make up for it. Just pick Sona if you want to be a hard scaling 5v5 support. Thresh also drops down to the C tier. The previous master of all trades isn't even a Jack anymore. He's just all around pretty bad, even at the highest levels of play where people have the awareness and mechanics to actually use his kit to the fullest. And finishing off our list, we have Vex, who gets demoted all the way down to the D tier. She is absolutely awful as a support. She's a burst mage, so you need to be pretty head to be useful. Since supports don't really get to have farm, that means you really have to be fed, which is not going to be consistently happening. And that wraps things up for our 12.6 mid-patch update. Hope you guys enjoyed this video, and feel free to let me know your thoughts on where the champions fall in the tier list down in the comment section below. Also, check out a link for our description to join our Discord. Best of luck on the Summoner's Rift, everybody. Stay safe, stay healthy, and have a wonderful day. Peace.